conference room on the 14th floor of Harriman Aerospace had a clock above the door that ticked too loud. I'd sat under that clock for 19 years of quarterly reviews, board presentations, and the occasional disciplinary meeting that wasn't about me. That morning, it was about me. I checked my watch. 9:47 a.m., Tuesday, the third week of March. Outside, Seattle was doing what Seattle does in March. Gray sky pressing down on the Sound. Rain that wasn't quite committed to falling. I'd driven in that morning with my granddaughter Sienna in the passenger seat because her school had a teacher development day and her mother was working a double shift at Harborview. Sienna was 14. She sat in my office now, 2 floors down, doing geometry homework on my old laptop, eating a blueberry muffin I'd grabbed her from the lobby cafe. I knew what was coming. I'd known since the previous Thursday, when the assistant outside the boardroom had handed me a fresh cup of coffee with a look that wasn't quite eye contact. People in offices know things before they're told. The body always tells first. The kid walked in at 9:52, 8 minutes late to his own ambush. He was 28 years old, wearing a slate blue suit that cost more than my first car, and he carried a leather folio under his arm like a prop. He was the CEO's son. Well, technically, the CEO's stepson, but everyone called him the heir anyway because the old man didn't have any other kids and made no secret of who he was grooming. His name doesn't matter. I'll call him the kid, because that's all he was. "Thanks for coming in," he said, sitting down across from me. He didn't shake my hand. He set the folio on the table, lined up its edge with the table's edge, and then relined it twice more before he could look at me. "We need to talk about the Guardian Avion situation. The Guardian Avion system. My system. My 23 years of work. The integrated cockpit security architecture that Harriman had licensed to every major U.S. commercial carrier and 3 branches of the Department of Defense. I'd written the first lines of its code in 2002 on a Dell tower that lived under my desk because my office didn't have a proper workstation back then. I had been 39 years old. I had thought I was building a tool. I didn't know yet that I was building the rest of my life. "What about it?" I said. "The acquisition is moving fast," he said. "Faster than projected. Lockwood Defense wants to close by Friday." He let that sit for a moment, like he expected me to be impressed. Lockwood was paying $470 million for Harriman. $470 million for what was, fundamentally, my codebase wrapped in a holding company. And during the transition, the board has decided we need to streamline some of the legacy roles. Mr. Harriman wants me to deliver the news personally. Out of respect. Out of respect. That was the line. I almost laughed. I felt it climb up my throat and I swallowed it down because the kid wasn't worth my laughter. "Streamline how?" I said. He opened the folio. "Effective immediately. Your position is being eliminated. We'll process a standard severance package, 6 weeks, plus accrued vacation. Mr. Harriman wanted me to express his gratitude for your years of service." I stared at him. I let the silence sit there long enough that he started to fidget. The kid had told this to other people before. I could see it in the way his shoulders preloaded into a defensive posture. He'd fired 42 people since he'd been made VP of Operations last June. He was on a hot streak. "Today is Tuesday," I said. "Right. My retention bonus clears on Saturday morning." The kid blinked. He glanced down at the folio. "I'm aware of the bonus situation, yes, and fortunately, the policy is clear. Termination prior to payout means the bonus is forfeited. It's standard." He smiled at me then, and it was the worst kind of smile. The kind that thinks it's kind. "Look, I know this is hard, but the company can't pay $185,000 to someone who's no longer with us. The optics, with the acquisition, the board's been very firm. $185,000, that's what they were firing me to save, out of a $470 million deal. The math of it was so stupid, I had to look at the carpet for a second to keep my face still. "Effective immediately," he said again because he liked the phrase. "Security will help you collect your things. We'll need your badge and your laptop today. We'd appreciate it if you didn't speak to other employees on your way out. The announcement to the team will go out at noon." I nodded slowly. I didn't say what I knew. I didn't say that 96 hours from now, when that retention bonus failed to hit my account on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. Pacific, an automatic clause was going to fire inside a sealed envelope sitting in a law office in Tacoma. I didn't say that the man who'd written that clause for me, my old boss, my mentor, the man who'd hired me when I was a kid with a degraded security clearance and no prospects, had been dead for 11 years. But his hand was still on the back of my neck, steering me through this exact moment. I didn't say any of it. I said, "All right, all right, all right." The kid looked confused. He'd expected something, tears probably, or yelling, or a long speech about my contributions. He'd come in with a script in his head, and I hadn't said any of the lines. "Well," he said, "okay then, let me walk you back to your office." "My granddaughter is in my office," I said. "I'll need a minute." The kid's face did something interesting then, a flicker of awareness that there were lives outside of him. It passed quickly. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need." I stood up. My knees popped. The way they do now. I'm 58 years old. I have prediabetes and a torn rotator cuff that I never had surgery on because the surgery was scheduled for the week my wife went into hospice, and after she was gone, I didn't see the point of getting fixed. I walked out of the conference room and rode the elevator down 2 floors, and when the doors opened, Sienna was sitting at my desk with her geometry book open and her hair pulled back in a ponytail that was already coming loose. She looked up and saw my face. "Grandpa," she said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart," I said. "We're going home a little early today. Pack up your stuff." I didn't tell her on the drive. I waited until we were back at my house in Ballard, until I'd made her grilled cheese and tomato soup, until she'd gone to her room to FaceTime with her best friend. Then I sat in the kitchen, and I called the number that I'd kept in my wallet on a folded card for 11 years. A woman answered on the second ring. "Pemberton and Associates, this is Calvin Bramley," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I need to speak with whoever handles the Pemberton estate matters, specifically the Bramley file." There was a long pause. I heard her type. I heard her stop typing. I heard her swallow. "Mr. Bramley," she said. "Yes, of course. Mr. Pemberton left very specific instructions. Can you come in this afternoon?" I drove to Tacoma. I sat in a waiting room that smelled like old paper and lemon polish. A man in his 60s, gray at the temples, brought me back to a conference room and set down a manila folder that had my name written on it in pen. Handwriting I recognized. Handwriting that hadn't existed in the world for over a decade. Donald Pemberton, the man who'd hired me at Cascade Avionics in 1996 before Harriman bought us out. The man who taught me how to write a contract, how to read a balance sheet, how to recognize when somebody was trying to take something from me before I knew it was even mine to lose. "Mr. Pemberton was very thorough," the attorney said. "He set this up in 2014. He told me at the time that you wouldn't need it. He hoped you wouldn't need it." The man slid the folder across the table. But he was very specific about what would trigger access. "Termination from Harriman Aerospace prior to a scheduled compensation event," I said. "Correct. He thought they'd do this to me eventually." He believed, the attorney said carefully, that any company that depended on a single individual's intellectual property would, over time, develop a financial incentive to remove that individual. He believed institutional memory was a liability to acquirers. He believed it was just a question of when. I opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents. The first was an assignment of intellectual property, executed in 2003, in which I had granted Cascade Avionics a perpetual license to use the Guardian Avion system in exchange for fair compensation and continued employment. The second was an amendment from 2007, when Harriman acquired Cascade, which had transferred that license to Harriman under the same terms. The third document was the one I had never seen before. It was a reversion clause, signed by Donald Pemberton, on behalf of Cascade's original board of directors, dated August of 2014. It stated, in language that took my eyes 3 passes to fully accept, that if I were ever terminated from Harriman or its successors without cause prior to the satisfaction of a vested compensation obligation, the entire Guardian Avian license, including all source code, all derivative works, all patent rights, and all customer-facing implementations would revert to me personally, in full, immediately, and without further action. I sat there for a long time. Mr. Pemberton paid the legal fees out of his own pocket, the attorney said. He never told the company it existed. He said, "You didn't need to know." He said the only person who ever needed to know was him, and then me. "Why?" I said. "He didn't elaborate," the attorney said, "but I will tell you that he came in the week after his cancer diagnosis. He was very tired. He told me he wanted to make sure that one good thing he'd done would outlast him." I didn't cry in that office. I cried in the car, in the parking lot, with my hands on the steering wheel and the rain finally committing to come down. I cried for a man who'd been gone 11 years and had still found a way to put his hand on my shoulder. I cried because Sienna was going to have her college paid for. I cried because the kid in the slate blue suit had no idea what he had just done. Then I drove home. And I waited. Wednesday morning, I got an email from HR confirming my termination and outlining the severance terms. No mention of the bonus. I didn't reply. I made breakfast for Sienna and drove her to school. I came home and I opened my laptop, my personal laptop, the one Harriman didn't own, and I started making a list. The Lockwood acquisition was a complicated animal. I knew this because I'd been in the room for the early stage due diligence meetings before they decided to streamline me out. I knew that Lockwood's offer was contingent on 3 things: regulatory approval, retention of key technical personnel, and an uninterrupted continuation of the Guardian Avian licensing revenue stream. That last one mattered more than the other 2 combined because Guardian Avian accounted for about 63% of Harriman's recurring annual revenue. The hardware divisions were essentially loss leaders kept alive to feed the software contracts. Lockwood wasn't buying an aerospace company. They were buying my code base, which meant that on Saturday morning, when the reversion clause fired, Lockwood was going to be buying a company that no longer owned its own primary product. I called Donald Pemberton's lawyer back. We spent 2 hours on the phone. By the end of it, I had a clear path. As of 6:01 a.m. Saturday morning, the license to Guardian Avian would belong to me personally. I would be under no obligation to renew or extend Harriman's right to use it. I would be free to license it to anyone else, including Lockwood directly, cutting Harriman out of the deal entirely. I would also be free to do nothing at all, in which case every airline and government agency currently running Guardian Avian would be in technical violation of federal aviation security protocols by Monday morning. I didn't want to ground a single airplane. That was the only thing I was sure of. Whatever I did, it couldn't endanger the flying public. So I told the lawyer to draft something for me, a 30-day continuation license that I personally would offer to Guardian Avian's existing customers at the same rate they'd been paying Harriman, conditional on a direct contract between me and them, bypassing Harriman entirely. Lockwood could sign that license too, if they wanted. The flying public would never know the difference. The only thing that would change was where the money went. The lawyer asked me what I wanted to do about Harriman. I told him to send Harriman nothing. No warning. No courtesy. Nothing. Thursday, the kid called me. 3 times. I let it go to voicemail every time. The 3rd message was the longest. He said there had been some confusion about the Guardian Avian documentation, that the transition team needed access to certain source repositories, that my old credentials had been revoked too aggressively, and he wanted to have a conversation about restoring some limited access so I could consult on the handoff. He said the word consult 3 times in 90 seconds. He sounded a little less sure of himself than he had on Tuesday. I didn't call back. I made dinner for Sienna. She wanted to talk about the spring formal at her school, which was 3 weeks away. Her mother, my daughter, had been working so many shifts that Sienna had basically been living with me since Christmas. I listened to her talk about the dress she wanted. I told her we'd go to the mall on Saturday and find it. I didn't tell her that by Saturday afternoon, the entire shape of my financial life would have changed. Friday morning, the calls started coming from numbers I didn't recognize. I let those go too. Around 11, my old assistant called from her personal cell. She'd been at Harriman almost as long as I had, and I picked up. "Calvin," she said, "what is going on? Everyone is losing their minds up here." "I got fired Tuesday," I said. "I know. The whole floor knows. That's not what I'm talking about." She lowered her voice. "Mr. Harriman has been in the conference room since 7 this morning. He's been screaming. There are lawyers everywhere. The kid hasn't come out of his office in 3 hours. Calvin, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, and it was the truth. I hadn't done anything. The thing that was about to happen had been done 11 years ago, by a man who was no longer alive. She was quiet for a moment. "Take care of yourself, Calvin," she said. "Whatever's coming, just take care of yourself." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and I watched the rain. The deal was supposed to close that afternoon. Lockwood's wire was supposed to hit Harriman's account by 4 p.m. Pacific. I had a strong feeling it wasn't going to happen. It didn't. At 2:14 p.m., the kid called again. This time I answered. "Sir," he said. His voice was thinner than I'd ever heard it. He had never called me sir. "Mr. Bramley, there's been a situation that I think you may be able to help us understand." "Is that so?" I said. "Lockwood's legal team did a final clean pass on the IP schedule this morning. They found something. An old reversion clause attached to the Guardian Avian file. We can't find it in any of our internal records. We can't find anyone who remembers signing it, but it's authentic. It was filed with King County in 2014 with notarization." I said. "They're saying the deal can't close. They're saying that as of Saturday morning, Harriman won't actually own the asset they're paying us for." He laughed. A strange, dry laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "It's the funniest thing. It's almost certainly a clerical error, right? There's no way Mr. Pemberton would have actually set something like this up. He was a friend of my stepfather's. You know that. I know that. So I need you to talk to Lockwood. I need you to tell them that obviously you have no intention of activating this clause, that you're a team player, that you understand the bigger picture here." His voice was wobbling. "Mr. Bramley, Calvin, if this deal falls through, we lose the price. Lockwood will walk. There's 2 other buyers in line, but they're at 320, 340 at the absolute top. We need this deal. Mr. Harriman, he wanted me to call you and ask if we could come to an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "In statement. With the bonus. And an additional retention package. We can talk numbers. Anything reasonable. Just please don't let this clause fire." I let the silence breathe. I looked at the kitchen ceiling. I looked at the picture on my fridge of Sienna at her 8th grade graduation last June. "You fired me 96 hours before my bonus," I said. "You did the math, didn't you? You did the math on whether 185 was worth it. You decided it was. That was a strategic decision that, in retrospect, did you do the math on what Guardian Avian is worth?" He was quiet. "You didn't, did you? You didn't read the file. You didn't look at the licensing schedule. You didn't ask anyone what Guardian Avian actually was before you decided I was a legacy role." I took a slow breath. 23 years, son. I wrote the first version of that code base when you were 5 years old. I rewrote it twice. I shipped 17 major releases. I have signed personally for every federal compliance audit since 2008. Every single airline and Air Force base running that system trusts it because of me, specifically, and you didn't know that. You didn't even know enough to know that you didn't know. Mr. Bramley, tell your stepfather," I said, "that I will be in my house in Ballard tomorrow morning. The reversion clause will fire at 6:01. After that point, I will be willing to negotiate continuation licenses directly with Lockwood on terms I will set. Harriman will not be part of those negotiations. Do you understand me? Mr. Bramley, please. Do you understand me, son? He understood. Saturday morning at 5:47 a.m., the doorbell rang. I'd been expecting it. I'd already made coffee. Sienna was still asleep upstairs. I opened the door, and there he was, the old man himself, Roger Harriman, 73 years old, the founder, the CEO, my employer of 19 years. He had not been to my house since the funeral. He was wearing a wool coat that was wet across the shoulders, and he looked smaller than I remembered. The kid was standing behind him on the porch, half a step back, the way a child stands behind his father when he's done something wrong. "Calvin," Roger said, "can I come in?" I let him in. I did not let the kid in. The kid stood out on my porch in the rain for the next 45 minutes, and I didn't think about him once. Roger sat at my kitchen table. I poured him coffee. He didn't drink it. "How did Donald do this without me knowing?" he said. "He didn't tell anyone. He was my friend. He was my friend too." Roger looked at his coffee. He stirred it once, even though there was nothing in it to stir. His hand was shaking very slightly. "I didn't know about the bonus play," he said. "I want you to know that. The kid did it on his own. He thought it would impress me. He thought I'd be proud of him for finding $185,000 in the couch cushions before the deal closed. That doesn't change what happened." "I know it doesn't. I'm not asking it to." He looked up at me. "Calvin, I am asking you, on my own behalf, not the company's. I am asking you to please consider letting this deal close. Lockwood is offering $470. If I lose them, my next best offer is $320. That difference is... That's the difference between my wife and I retiring comfortably and us spending the rest of our lives watching every dollar. That difference is the pensions of 740 employees who were promised something when I sold this company." "Roger," I said, "please." I sat across from him. I drank my coffee. The clock on my microwave clicked over to 5:58. "I'm not going to ground any airplanes," I said. "I'm going to offer Lockwood a 30-day continuation license at the existing rate, directly from me. They can sign it Monday morning. After 30 days, we can renegotiate." He waited. "But I'm not going to let your acquisition close with you owning Guardian Avion. That asset belongs to me. As of 3 minutes from now, it has always belonged to me, and the contract that says so has been sitting in a file cabinet in Tacoma since the year you broke ground on your Renton facility. Lockwood is going to pay you for the hardware divisions and the brand and the building leases and the customer relationships. They're going to pay you a fair price for what you actually own. They are not going to pay you for my work. That'll cut the deal in half. Probably more than half. My pensions, Calvin." "Your pensions are insured by the PBGC, Roger. You and I both know that. The federal government will cover your employees. They will not cover your retirement. They will not cover your kids' trust fund. They will not cover the condo in Cabo. That's what this is about. That's what it's always been about." He didn't deny it. He didn't even look offended. He just looked tired. The clock clicked over to 601. I felt nothing. I want to be honest about this. I had thought I would feel something. Vindication, triumph, fury, grief. I felt none of it. I felt a man at a kitchen table on a Saturday morning with coffee in front of him, while another man across from him absorbed the slow fact of his own diminishment. There was no music in it. There was no drama. There was just the rain on the kitchen window and the smell of coffee and a clock that meant nothing now because the thing it had been counting down to had already happened. Roger nodded once. Slowly, he stood up. He hadn't touched his coffee. 30-day license, he said, direct with Lockwood, bypassing Harriman. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I figured." He pulled his coat back on. He looked at me one more time. "Donald was a son of a bitch, Calvin. I mean that with love. He was a son of a bitch, and he saw this coming from 100 miles off. He did. You take care of yourself. You too, Roger." He walked out. I watched him put his hand on the kid's shoulder on the porch. The kid said something to him, urgently, and Roger shook his head. They walked back to the car together. The kid kept looking back at the house. Roger never did. The deal didn't close on Friday, and it didn't close the following Monday. And by Wednesday, Lockwood's lawyers had reopened negotiations at $295 million, a number that reflected the actual value of Harriman Aerospace without the asset that had been masquerading as its own. Roger took it. He had to. His board forced him to. The kid was quietly removed from his VP role 2 weeks after the closing. The official reason was a restructuring, but everyone in the industry knew he'd been the guy who lost $175 million in shareholder value because he wanted to save $185,000 on a retention bonus. He'd worked at Harriman 1 year, 2 months, and 11 days. I never heard his name in the trade press again. Lockwood signed my continuation license on the second Monday. They paid me directly at the rate Harriman had been paying themselves for my work. Then, at the end of the 30 days, they offered me a 5-year exclusive license at a substantial multiple of that rate, with a clause that I retain all rights of ownership and could exit the agreement on 90 days' notice. I had my lawyer review it. I signed it. The first year's payment alone was more than I had made in salary across my last 6 years at Harriman combined. I paid off my house. I paid off my daughter's car. I called my daughter, who had not let me help her with anything since her divorce 3 years ago, and I told her that Sienna's college fund was no longer a question, and neither was hers. She wanted to go back to school for the nursing administration degree she'd had to drop out of when Sienna's father left. She cried on the phone. I cried after we hung up. I bought Sienna her dress for the formal. It was lavender. She looked beautiful in it. The Sunday after the deal closed, I drove out to Bonnie Lake to see Donald. The cemetery sits up on a low ridge with a view of the foothills. I'd been there a handful of times over the years, on the anniversary of his death and on his birthday, but I hadn't been since the previous fall. The grass was wet. The headstones were dark with rain. I sat down in front of his stone. I sat on the wet ground because there wasn't a bench, and I didn't care any more about the things I used to care about, like dry pants. "Donald," I said, "you magnificent bastard." I sat there for a long time. I told him about the kid. I told him about Roger. I told him about Lockwood. I told him about Sienna's dress. I told him about how I had cried in that lawyer's parking lot, and that I was sorry I hadn't said thank you sooner, and that I hadn't understood, even at his funeral, how much of my life was going to belong to him for the rest of it. He didn't say anything back. Of course he didn't. But I felt him there. I felt his hand on the back of my neck the way I'd felt it the first day he hired me in 1996, when I was 33 years old and had nothing, and he sat across a desk from me and said, "Son, I think we're going to do some things together." I felt it the way I felt it when I was promoted to senior architect in 2001, and he came into my office with 2 cups of bad coffee, and we toasted in silence. I felt it the morning of his funeral, when I stood at his graveside next to his wife, and I felt it now, 12 years later, on a wet Sunday in March, with mud soaking through my jeans. "I miss you," I said. The rain came down a little harder. I sat there until I was thoroughly soaked. Then I got up, and I drove home. And Sienna met me at the door because she'd been worried I'd been gone too long. I made her dinner. I helped her with her geometry. After she went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of bourbon, and I thought about how the math of revenge is almost never what people think it is. People think revenge is about subtraction, about taking something from someone else. But the only revenge that ever mattered to me was the one I almost didn't take, the one where I almost let the kid have his small win and walked away with nothing because I was tired and I was old and I was ready to stop fighting. The thing Donald had given me, 11 years after his death, wasn't a contract. It was permission. Permission to not absorb the last punch. Permission to step out of the way and let the punch land somewhere else, on the wall, on the floor, on the people who had thrown it. Permission to be done. I was done. I am done. The clock above the conference room door on the 14th floor of Harriman Aerospace is still ticking, I assume. I don't think about it anymore. There's a different clock in my kitchen now, an old one my wife picked out when we moved in 31 years ago, and it doesn't tick at all. It hums, very softly. You only hear it if the house is completely still. I hear it all the time these days. I've thought a lot in the months since that Saturday morning about what actually happened in my kitchen with Roger Harriman. Not the legal mechanics, not the wire that didn't clear. The real thing underneath all of it. What happened was this. A young man, the stepson, the kid in the slate blue suit, chose to be clever instead of being decent. He looked at a balance sheet and saw $185,000 he could subtract, and he decided the man attached to that number was a line item, not a person. He never asked who I was. He never asked what I had built. He never asked what would happen if I were removed. He thought the math was simple. It wasn't simple. It wasn't simple, and the world, in its own slow way, sent him the bill for the question he forgot to ask. That's the cause. The consequence took 23 years to arrive because Donald Pemberton saw the road ahead of me when I was still too young to see it myself. He didn't protect me out of pity. He protected me because he understood something about the way large institutions eventually eat the people who feed them, and he refused to let it happen to one specific person he believed in. That's the kind of foresight you can only build over a long life of paying close attention. I want to honor that. I want to live up to it. The hardest lesson I'm still learning is that decency without preparation is a kind of vanity. I trusted Harriman for 19 years, and I would have walked out of that conference room with a severance check and a handshake if Donald hadn't already done the harder work behind my back. Goodness alone doesn't protect you. Brains alone don't protect you. What protects you is the slow, unglamorous discipline of building something honest, documenting it carefully, and trusting the right people with the truth of what you've done. That's not paranoia. That's stewardship. And the last thing, the thing I want my granddaughter Sienna to learn from this, more than anything, is that there's a kind of strength that doesn't shout. The kid expected me to yell. Roger expected me to gloat. I didn't do either. Not because I'm a better man than that, but because I'd already decided, somewhere on the drive home from Tacoma, that I wasn't going to spend the last good decades of my life carrying their weight inside me. Anger is a tax you pay to people who don't deserve any more of your money. So I built. I waited. I let the contract do what the contract was written to do. And when it was done, I went home, and I made my granddaughter dinner, and I went to a cemetery in Bonnie Lake, and I sat in the mud, and I thanked an old friend. That's the whole story. That's all of it.